Running into my dad with his arm around a young woman's waist at the airport, I smiled and called out, "Hey, Dad." The girl turned pale while my father turned to stone right on the spot. It was a Friday afternoon, and the harsh glare of the sun from the city I had just left still seemed to cling to my coat as I pulled my carry-on out of the arrivals terminal of the international airport. A grueling, week-long business trip out of state had drained the very last drop of energy from my 26-year-old body. The relentless corporate grind, the late-night strategy meetings, and the rushed fast food dinners had left my stomach in constant knots. Right now, my mind was entirely consumed by the image of the warm, cozy kitchen back home. I was desperately craving the savory aroma of the slow-cooked beef stew my mother always simmered on the stove. Mom always knew exactly what I wanted to eat after a long trip. Just thinking about her gentle smile and a hot home-cooked meal gave my legs the strength to walk faster toward the rideshare pickup zone. The airport on a weekend afternoon was packed. The blaring announcements over the PA system intertwined with the hurried footsteps and the honking of cars outside, creating a chaotic buzzing noise in my head. I squeezed past a crowd of passengers waiting at the baggage carousel, heading straight for the exit. But then my footsteps came to a sudden halt, as if someone had glued my shoes to the cold granite floor. Around a blind corner near a coffee kiosk, a silhouette so familiar I could recognize it with my eyes closed drifted across my line of sight. It was my father, Richard, a 53-year-old man, the model family patriarch, the strict and respectable corporate director at his firm. Yet the man standing less than 30 feet away from me exuded a completely foreign aura. My father wasn't wearing his usual modest pastel button-downs or neatly tucked-in polo shirts. He was wearing a trendy slim-fit leather bomber jacket. His naturally salt and pepper hair had been dyed jet black and meticulously styled with gel. But his drastic makeover wasn't the most horrifying part. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand when I looked down at his hands. One hand was pulling a small pastel pink rolling suitcase, the kind meant for a dreamy teenage girl. His other hand was wrapped tightly around the waist of a young woman, holding her with sickening affection. The girl was wearing a pristine, flowy white sundress, her long curled hair cascading down her back. Her petite frame was pressed snugly against my father's chest like a little bird seeking shelter. At a glance, she couldn't have been older than 20. My dad looked down at her. His eyes gazed at her with a passionate adoration, and the smile on his lips was so radiant and youthful that I hadn't seen anything like it in my 26 years as his daughter. The two of them walked and whispered intimately to each other. Occasionally, the girl would look up, giggle, and playfully pat my father's chest. The space around me seemed to be sucked dry of all sound. My hands went numb. My eyes were locked onto this grotesque scene unfolding right in the middle of a crowded public space. A cold chill ran down my spine, spreading to every cell in my body. I blinked repeatedly, hoping this was just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. I told myself I must have mistaken a stranger who merely looked like my dad. My father was at the office. He was a faithful husband, a father who had always lectured me about morality, integrity, and decency. But no, the cruel reality offered no escape. The square-faced Swiss watch on his wrist was the exact anniversary gift my mother had saved half a year's salary to buy him for their 20th anniversary. The faint little scar near the corner of his left eye was unmistakably clear under the bright airport lights. It was my father in the flesh, cuddling a girl young enough to be his daughter. My throat tasted like ash, and a heavy weight crushed my chest, making it hard to breathe. The beautiful worldview, the happy family, the image of the perfect father I had built up for nearly 3 decades, was cracking into massive pieces, ready to collapse into a pile of desolate ruins. I gripped the handle of my suitcase so tightly, my knuckles turned white. A surge of hot anger rushed from my chest straight to my brain. Fury, heartbreak, and a profound sense of betrayal blended together into a violent storm ravaging my mind. I stood, rooted to the spot, my legs heavy as lead, unable to tear my eyes away from the couple, drowning in their fake happiness. My heart skipped a long beat, feeling as if it had stopped entirely. The scene before me was ruthlessly sharp. Standing at a distance, my gaze bored into the young girl nestled in my father's arms. Her skin was flawless, glowing with the vibrant energy of her early 20s. Her carefree smile and the coy twinkle in her eyes were those of someone who was utterly spoiled and loved. Suddenly, my mother's image flashed into my mind, so clear and heartbreaking, it made me choke up. Mom was 51. Her hair was half gray, requiring constant dye jobs to hide the toll of time. Her eyes bore the deep, tired creases of 30 years spent sacrificing her youth to care for our family and his aging parents. Her hands were rough and calloused from decades of scrubbing and cleaning. Mom always wore the same faded, comfortable sweaters, always giving the best cuts of meat to her husband and daughter. Her silent sacrifices were rewarded with this despicable scene. The contrast between my aging, worn-out mother at home and the fresh, youthful girl being pampered by my father at the airport felt like a whip lashing directly across my mind. I took a deep breath. The icy air from the terminal's AC filled my lungs, helping me regain a shred of clarity. A terrifyingly cold composure rose within me. Crying or throwing a tantrum right now would only make things uglier. I couldn't allow myself to be weak in front of liars. I loosened my grip on my luggage handle, then tightened it again. I held my head high, plastered a hollow smile on my lips, and took long, decisive strides toward them. The sound of my suitcase wheels rolling over the granite floor clicked in a steady rhythm, like a metronome signaling the end of a perfect stage play. When I was about 3 steps away, my father coincidentally looked up. His eyes locked directly with mine. In a fraction of a millisecond, the blissful smile on his face froze, then vanished completely. His complexion shifted from a healthy flush to the pale white of a sheet of paper. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic, his pupils shrinking. The hand that had been wrapped around the young girl's waist suddenly began to tremble, dropping limply to his side as if he'd been paralyzed. He opened his mouth to say something, but his throat seemed completely blocked. Not a single sound escaped. I stopped standing tall and directly in their path. I kept the smile on my face, a perfect smile that betrayed none of the rage boiling inside me. I looked straight into my father's eyes. My gaze was unimaginably cold and sharp. Then I shifted my eyes to the young girl beside him, evaluating her from head to toe. The girl blinked in confusion, not understanding what was happening, looking up at my dad for help. The air around us thickened, growing so deadly silent I could hear my father's panicked, shallow breathing. I cleared my throat and spoke in a sweet, clear voice that carried the destructive force of a bomb. Looking right at the man I had called Dad for 26 years. I said loudly, "Hey, Dad. Picking up your new girlfriend?" I dragged out the word Dad, enunciating every syllable perfectly, then turned to the young girl, shrinking against him, giving her a painfully polite nod. "Hi there." Was the flight exhausting? The words slipped from my lips like razor blades. I saw my father's shoulders jerk violently. His chest heaved as if he were being deprived of oxygen. He took a half step back, looking at me with pleading eyes. But I didn't care about his pathetic display. I had just delivered a fatal blow to his hypocritical mask in broad daylight. My greeting hung heavy in the air, crushing the 2 people in front of me with the weight of 1,000 pounds. The young girl's complexion rapidly shifted from confusion to a sickly gray. Her round eyes widened as far as they could go, looking at me then, frantically up at the man beside her. She seemed to realize something was terribly, horrifyingly wrong, though her youthful mind couldn't yet process it. Her pink-tinted lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but she stopped. She took a step back, creating a small distance between herself and my father, her hands clasping together as she clung to a fragile sense of calm. As for my father, he was completely immobilized. The dignified, authoritative man who regularly lectured me on life lessons was reduced to a lifeless wax figure. His eyes were bloodshot. The wrinkles around them twitched uncontrollably. He opened his mouth desperately trying to form words but failed. There were no excuses, no denials, only the deafening silence of a guilty man caught red-handed. The hand gripping the pink suitcase tightened so hard that the blue veins bulged against his skin. He looked at me with a mix of absolute terror and a weak, desperate plea. I didn't give him a second to recover. I dropped my smile, my face settling into a mask of emotionless ice. I casually raised my wrist to check my watch. Time seemed to stop the moment I lowered my arm. Staring right into his terrified, pale face, I spoke clearly and distinctly. "Mom's making her beef stew tonight. When you're done playing around, make sure you bring your girlfriend home so we can all have dinner together. I'm heading back to help Mom." With that, I didn't linger for a single second to watch their reactions. I turned my back decisively and walked away, my posture proud and straight. The sound of the rolling wheels clicked again, steady and heartless. Behind me, I could still feel my father's horrified gaze glued to my retreating back. I knew the young girl was trembling in extreme confusion, and I knew the lying man was rooted to the spot by the humiliating truth. I took long strides toward the automatic glass doors of the airport. As the doors slid open, a blast of hot, late-afternoon air hit my face. The glaring rays of the setting sun made me squint. The exact moment I stepped out of the cold, air-conditioned terminal, the resilient armor I had just built for myself shattered entirely. My vision blurred, and tears I hadn't realized I was holding back spilled over, streaming down my hot cheeks. A suffocating lump rose in my throat, forcing a small sob from my lips. I cried for my mother, for her blind sacrifices, and for my own shattered trust. The wonderful father I had idolized my entire life died the moment he held another woman at this airport. I dragged my luggage, running toward the rideshare lane, wanting nothing more than to escape this suffocating place as quickly as possible, ignoring the tears falling under the fading sunlight. I tossed my bag into the trunk of the approaching Uber and hurriedly slid into the back seat. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror with a sympathetic look upon seeing my tear-stained face. I quickly wiped my cheeks, took a deep breath, swallowed a sob, and gave him my home address in a low voice. The car merged into the heavy rush-hour traffic of commuters heading home. The tight space inside the car, the stale AC, and the musky scent of the air freshener made me dizzy and nauseous. I leaned back against the seat and squeezed my eyes shut. My mind was spinning in an inescapable, chaotic web. The image of my dad and that girl holding each other intimately replayed in my head like a slow-motion film, sharp and cruel. My chest felt like a boulder was sitting on it. A sickening feeling surged from my stomach to my throat. For the entire ride home, my mind was violently torn between two thoughts. Half of me screamed to run into the house, immediately blow the whole thing up, and tear off Richard's hypocritical mask. My mom had the right to know the truth. She couldn't keep living in this pathetic lie. But the other half of me was cowardly and timid. My mother had high blood pressure, and her health had declined significantly over the past few years. If she found out that the husband she had worshipped and served for 30 years was keeping a young girl on the side, could she survive? The shock, I was terrified of seeing her tears. Terrified that this family would shatter beyond repair. Right at that moment, the phone in my purse began vibrating violently. The piercing ringtone shattered the silence in the car. I startled, pulling my phone out. The bright screen displayed the word, Dad. Seeing the name saved in my contacts made my stomach twist in pain. I coldly hit decline and tossed the phone onto the seat next to me. But it refused to stay quiet. It started buzzing frantically again. A second, third, and fourth call came in rapid succession. The driver occasionally glanced at me through the mirror, unable to hide his curiosity. I pressed my lips together, grabbed the phone, and flipped the silent switch. Unable to call, he started sending text messages. The texts rapidly stacked up on my lock screen, every single word stinging my eyes. Natalie, please pick up. It's not what you think. Give me a chance to explain. Please don't tell your mother. She's not well, she won't be able to handle it. I'm begging you, Nat. I'll tell you everything when I get home. I stared at the words, I'm begging you. A bitterly sarcastic smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. It was laughable. The man who always prided himself on his honor and integrity. The man who taught me to always be honest and never tell half-truths. Now he was lowering himself, texting his daughter to beg her to cover up his vile actions. The image of the grand protective family patriarch officially crumbled into dust, impossible to salvage. He was using my mother's health as a human shield, as an excuse to force me into complicity with his sins. Tears welled up again, blurring the phone screen. I powered off the device, threw it into my bag, and rested my head against the car window. The city outside had lit up brilliantly, but inside me was an endless, freezing darkness. The warm family I had always been so proud of turned out to be nothing more than an incredibly sophisticated stage play. The Uber pulled up to the familiar suburban colonial house, sitting quietly at the end of a cul-de-sac. I stepped out heavily and pulled my luggage from the trunk. The white picket fence looked quiet and still under the yellow glow of the street lamp. I took a deep breath, trying to adjust my expression, erasing the exhaustion and agony before walking inside. I didn't want my mom to notice anything out of the ordinary right now. The moment I opened the front door, the rich, savory smell of slow-cooked beef stew drifted out from the kitchen in the back. The clinking of silverware signaled that my mom was setting the table. Hearing the rattle of my suitcase wheels, Mom rushed out from the dining room to greet me. She was wearing her usual comfortable sweatpants and an oversized cardigan, a faded floral apron tied around her waist. As soon as she saw me, her worn face lit up with a warm, gentle smile. "My girl is home. Here, give me your bag, I'll take it." "You must be exhausted from the trip," she said, practically wrestling the suitcase from my grip. Her eyes scanned my face and she clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Goodness, you were only gone for a week and you look so thin. Your face is so pale. Go wash up and come eat. I've had your favorite beef stew in the slow cooker all afternoon. The meat is falling off the bone." Her tender care and warm voice made my nose sting. I had to blink rapidly to keep the tears from spilling over. I looked around the quiet living room, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible to ask a question I already knew the answer to. Where's Dad? Is he not home for dinner? My mom pushed the suitcase into the corner of the hallway, turned around to untie her apron, her tone completely casual and devoid of suspicion. Your father called this afternoon. He said the firm had an emergency quarterly report, so he had to work late. He told us to eat without him, and he'll heat up a plate when he gets back. It's the end of the month, so he's been working late a lot recently. Her words stabbed into my mind like a sharp blade. Working late. Emergency report. These perfect, smooth lies were weapons he wielded expertly to cover up his deceit. I looked at my mother, a woman who had spent her whole life toiling away, trusting her husband implicitly, and my heart physically ached. I obediently said, "Okay," went to wash my hands and sat down at the dining table. The table was set for just the two of us. A steaming bowl of rich beef stew, a plate of warm buttery rolls, and a side of roasted green beans. All my favorites. Mom scooped the biggest piece of beef into my bowl and urged me to eat before it got cold. I pushed the food around, chewing mechanically, finding everything bitter and impossible to swallow. While eating, I secretly glanced up at Mom. Under the bright pendant lights of the kitchen, I suddenly realized her eyes were red and swollen. Faint, unwiped tear streaks lingered near the corners of her eyes. I froze, put my fork down, and asked with urgent concern, "Mom, why are your eyes so red? Were you crying? Did someone upset you?" Mom flinched slightly. She quickly brought her sleeve up to wipe her eyes, forcing a laugh and looking away. "What are you talking about? Crying? I chopped a massive yellow onion this afternoon and the fumes went straight to my head. It made my eyes water like crazy. Eat up, it's getting cold." She picked up her fork and looked down at her plate, eating hurriedly. Her clumsy lie couldn't fool me. An onion wouldn't make both her eyes swell up and wrinkle like that. It was obvious she had been crying a lot. My intuition told me that my mother was hiding a deep, suppressed agony in her heart, a sorrow she was forcing down to maintain the facade of a peaceful home. Dinner passed in heavy silence. The clinking of forks against porcelain couldn't fill the invisible void expanding in the house. The meal ended in a suffocating atmosphere. I forced myself to finish my bowl, so she wouldn't suspect anything, even though my stomach was cramping with anxiety. Mom started clearing the table. Out of habit, I stood up to gather the greasy plates and bring them to the sink. The kitchen lights reflected off the stainless steel. The water roared from the faucet. The lemon-scented Dawn dish soap bubbled up into white foam. Mom stood next to me, holding a sponge, scrubbing a plate. With her hands submerged in soapy water, the calluses and age spots on her skin were painfully obvious. Looking at those frail hands, the image of the smooth, pale hands of the young girl at the airport rushed back, suffocating my reason. I couldn't bear this silence for another second. I wanted to know what my mother was really thinking. I wanted to know if she was crying over an onion or over some other pain gnawing at her soul. I turned the faucet down. The roaring water faded into a tense quiet. I took a deep breath, mustering all my courage to ask, keeping my eyes fixed on the soapy suds. "Mom, do you think Dad treats you well?" The question hung in the air, light in volume but heavy as a boulder. Mom, who was scrubbing a large bowl, froze. Her movements stopped completely in midair for about 3 seconds before she resumed washing. She let out a soft laugh, a forced laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Why is my daughter asking such a weird question today?" "Of course your dad is good to me. He's worked hard to provide for us all these years, pays all the bills, and puts his paycheck in the joint account without missing a dime. He doesn't gamble or drink. Everyone in the neighborhood respects him. Having a husband like your father is a blessing, Natalie." Those hollow praises rang in my ears like a scratched record. A blessing. If she knew her blessing was hugging a girl young enough to be his daughter in a crowded airport just hours ago, what would she think? A wave of fury surged within me. I refused to let my mother continue drowning in this illusion of fake happiness. I decided to take it a step further. My voice grew sharp and serious. "But nobody is perfect. If one day Dad did something to betray you, something really terrible, what would you do, Crash?" The ceramic plate in my mother's hand slipped, slamming hard against a glass bowl in the sink with a deafening shatter. Soapy water splashed everywhere, hitting our faces and clothes. But Mom didn't seem to notice. She stood completely frozen, her entire body turning rigid as stone. Her chest heaved rapidly under her thin cardigan. From a side profile, I saw her eyes widen, filled with absolute terror mixed with anxiety and a tiny fragile glimmer of expectation. She slowly turned her head to look at me. Her face had gone pale from fear, her lips trembling. She didn't answer my question. Instead, she asked one of her own in a choked, panicked whisper. Do you know something? Those words drove straight into my brain. She didn't deny it. She didn't instinctively defend him like a fiercely loyal wife would. She asked if I knew something. This proved my intuition was entirely correct. My mother was hiding a massive secret. She already knew about that man's sins, and she was silently bearing the weight of it, all alone. Tears sprang to my eyes. I wanted to hug her to sob and tell her that I saw everything. But right as I opened my mouth to speak, a loud noise from the living room severed my train of thought. The distinct jingling of keys turning in the front door lock echoed clearly in the quiet house. Then came the familiar hum of the garage door closing. My father was home. The sound of the front door opening spilled into the kitchen, making the already tense atmosphere unbearably suffocating. Mom jumped. She hurriedly grabbed a dish towel to dry her hands, turning her face away to hide her panicked eyes. She cleared her throat, smoothed down her messy hair, and slipped back on the mask of the diligent, gentle housewife. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, leading from the living room to the kitchen. My father appeared in the doorway. He had taken off that trendy leather jacket and replaced it with the familiar light blue dress shirt he usually wore to work. His dyed hair was still perfectly styled, but he purposely scrunched up his face, feigning extreme exhaustion. He set his leather briefcase down and let out a long, dramatic sigh. Man, the office was chaotic today. I'm exhausted. Did you two eat a flawless performance? If I hadn't witnessed that disgusting scene with my own eyes this afternoon, I probably would have walked over to massage his shoulders and pour him a glass of water. But looking at his deeply acted exhaustion now, my stomach churned in revulsion. The terrifying hypocrisy radiated from his every movement. This man's words made my skin crawl. My mother, through some superhuman willpower, managed to keep her gentle smile. She hurried over to take his coat. We just finished. I left some stew and rolls warming in the oven for you. Go upstairs and take a warm shower. I'll get your plate ready. My dad nodded, wiping imaginary sweat from his forehead. He sneakily glanced over at me. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I clearly saw the fear and probing paranoia hidden deep in his bloodshot eyes. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, arms crossed over my chest, my lips curled into a cold, indifferent smirk. I won't greet you. I want to see how long you can keep playing the role of the perfect father. My father quickly averted his eyes, dodging my dagger-like stare, and trudged upstairs to shower. About 15 minutes later, he came back down. He was wearing his silk gray pajamas, and he collapsed onto the living room sofa, turning the TV to the evening news. Mom was finishing putting the clean dishes away, and told me to take a plate of sliced apples out to the living room for Dad. I carried the plate and slammed it down hard on the glass coffee table. The harsh clatter made my dad jump. Only the two of us were in the living room. The glow from the TV illuminated the sharp angles of my face. I sat down in the armchair opposite him, staring unblinking at the man who was desperately trying to glue his eyes to the screen to avoid me. Eat some apples, Dad, I said in a flat, emotionless monotone. He trembled slightly, reached out to grab a slice and brought it to his mouth, chewing mechanically. I tilted my head slowly, pouring my words into his ears. You know, this afternoon at the airport I bumped into a man. He looked exactly like you. Same build, same face, even down to the little scar near his left eye. You must have a secret twin brother that you've been hiding from Mom and me, right? The piece of apple in my father's mouth fell straight into his throat, making him choke violently. He clutched his chest, coughing uncontrollably, his face turning from bright red to ghostly white. His hands fumbled to grab the glass of water on the table, but he knocked it over, spilling water all over the glass surface. Absolute panic was visible in every fiber of his being. He forced a smile, a pathetic, twisted grimace. You must have mistaken someone else, honey. I was at the office in a board meeting until late evening. I don't have any twin brothers. I scoffed and stood up abruptly. I didn't want to waste another second listening to these cheap lies. I leaned over the table, getting close to his face, and lowered my voice into an icy hiss. Did you go to your board meeting pulling a pastel pink suitcase? Cut the act, Dad. You genuinely terrify me. With that, I turned around and marched straight upstairs, leaving the trembling, pale-faced man alone in the cold living room. I walked into my bedroom and locked the door tight. The familiar room that held all my peaceful childhood memories suddenly felt suffocating and alien. I threw myself onto the soft bed but couldn't close my eyes. My mind was a machine spinning at thousands of RPMs. Every time I shut my eyes, the image of my dad walking hand in hand with that girl, Chloe, flashed clearly, ruthlessly, shredding any attempt at finding peace. Then the image of my mother's calloused hands and her panicked eyes in the kitchen rushed back, crushing my chest. I tossed and turned. The AC was pumping out cool air, but my whole body felt like it was burning. Sweat soaked the back of my shirt. Time dragged on like a snail. The silence of the night amplified every tiny noise. The ticking of the wall clock felt dry and rhythmic. The rustling of the oak leaves outside the window, the distant rumble of a car speeding down the main road. Everything blended into a symphony of restlessness and anxiety. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and lit up the screen. The digital clock read 2:30 a.m. It was the middle of the night and I still couldn't sleep. My throat was bone dry. I decided to get up, slip on my slippers, and quietly open my door, sneaking down the hallway to the kitchen for water. The house was engulfed in pitch blackness, with only the faint amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, casting ghostly streaks across the staircase. I tiptoed down to avoid waking my mom. Just as my foot hit the bottom step leading into the living room, my nose was hit with the acrid smell of cigarette smoke. It was the distinct smell of Marlboros, the brand my dad smoked whenever he was immensely stressed. I froze. My eyes scanned the dark living room. Over by the recliner, a tiny red ember flickered in the dark. The weak glow reflected off the gaunt, exhausted face of the man sitting as still as a ghost. It was my father. He hadn't turned on any lights. He sat alone in the dark, a burning cigarette pinched between his fingers. Gray smoke drifted up, curled, and vanished into the silent air. The TV had been off for hours. Only his heavy, depressive sighs occasionally broke the crushing silence. Seeing me walk down, his movement of bringing the cigarette to his lips halted midair. The red ember stayed completely still. The air in the living room thickened so dense with tension you could cut it with a knife. I didn't turn on the light. I just walked over, pulled up the armchair opposite him, and sat down. We were separated only by the cold glass coffee table. Neither of us said a word. The silence dragged on, suffocating and excruciating. I glared into the shadows, hiding his face, waiting for an explanation for the ruins he had created. The sound of ash dropping into the glass ashtray clicked faintly. Finally, the man couldn't take the torture of the silence any longer. He stubbed out the half-smoked cigarette and let out a long, defeated sigh. In the darkness, his voice was hoarse, choked, and trembling. "I'm sorry, Natalie." Those 3 short words officially put an end to any last glimmer of hope inside me. My father had confessed. There were no more excuses about emergency reports, mistaken identities at the airport, or twin brothers. The naked, wrong truth had been laid bare right in our living room at 2:30 inches the morning. I clenched my hands on my knees, biting my lip to keep from crying. I coldly demanded the truth. "Who is she? How long have you been sneaking around behind Mom's back?" Richard hung his head, burying his face in his hands, aggressively messing up his meticulously dyed hair. The bitter truth was about to be ripped open. He sat hunched over on the sofa, his usually imposing figure now slouched, small and pathetic. In the dark, his exhales carried absolute exhaustion and dead-end despair. He slowly looked up to meet my judging eyes. In a dry, hollow voice, entirely devoid of life, he began to recount the darkest story of his life. "The girl you saw at the airport today is Chloe. She's not my mistress like you think. She's my biological daughter. Your half-sister." My heart felt like it had been smashed by a sledgehammer. Biological daughter. Half-sister. Those phrases hammered against my eardrums, utterly destroying the walls of reason I was desperately trying to hold up. My mouth fell open, and I felt as though the oxygen in the room had vanished. I couldn't speak. My father swallowed hard and continued in his flat, lifeless tone. "It happened 20 years ago. You had just turned 6. The company sent me out of state for a long-term commercial construction project in the Midwest, living far from home for months, lonely and isolated. I met Chloe's mother. She was a waitress at a diner where my crew used to eat. I was younger, stupid, and after a few too many drinks at a crew dinner, I didn't control myself. I crossed the line with her. It was a disastrous mistake that I've had to carry for the rest of my life. I sat stunned in my chair. 20 years ago. I was 6. That was the year I started first grade. That was the year my dad bought me a beautiful pink bicycle with training wheels and patiently ran alongside me in the driveway every afternoon. That was the time I proudly bragged to all my friends that I had the greatest dad in the world. And yet during that exact beautiful time, my perfect dad was holding another. My sweet childhood memories suddenly became twisted, fake, and riddled with deceit. I swear it was just a brief lapse in judgment. Richard rushed to defend himself, his tone turning desperate. "When the project ended, I cut off all contact immediately and came back to you and your mom. I intended to bury that secret forever. But life didn't work out that way. 6 months later, that woman showed up at my office. She was heavily pregnant. She cried and said she didn't want me to take responsibility, she just wanted me to acknowledge the baby. I was terrified. My career would be ruined, terrified your mother would find out and divorce me. Ultimately, I chose to compromise. I sent her a monthly wire transfer to raise the child, and in return, she had to stay quiet and never appear in front of my family. My chest heaved violently. I felt sick to my stomach. This man's cowardice disgusted me. He dared to do the deed, but was too scared to face the consequences. He used money to buy silence to maintain the facade of a happy family to deceive his wife and daughter for 2 entire decades. Things stayed quiet for 20 years. I only ever wired money. I never once met them face to face. His voice dropped, carrying a strange, sorrowful weight. But last month, Chloe's mother died of cancer. The kid is only 19, completely alone in the world. Before she died, her mother gave her my address and phone number. She took a bus all the way from her small town to the city to find me. I'm the only family she has left. I couldn't just close my eyes and ignore her, Nat. The story ended. The darkness of the living room swallowed the 2 people who shared blood, but were thousands of miles apart in soul. The cruel truth had been entirely exposed, leaving me in ultimate despair. I sat in silence for a long time, letting his words soak into my understanding. His explanation sounded somewhat responsible, portraying the humanity of a father who couldn't abandon his flesh and blood when the child was orphaned. But to me, it was just a cheap excuse to cover up the deeply ingrained selfishness and deceit in his character. I looked up into the shadows where he sat. Tossing aside the last shred of respect I had for him, I interrogated him with a cold, razor-sharp tone. You say you only sent money and never saw her for 20 years. You say you only brought her here out of a father's obligation. I let out a bitter, sarcastic laugh. Stop playing the victim of circumstance, Dad. I saw your smile at the airport today with my own eyes. You were glowing. You were happy. You held her waist with such immense pampering and adoration. That smile, that look. In 26 years, I have never seen you look at Mom like that. Not once. My words hit a nerve and my father flinched. He fumbled, opening his mouth to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I unleashed words sharp as knives, piercing through every mask he was trying to hold on to. You pulled that pink suitcase strutting around next to her. You dyed your hair, wore a leather jacket just to look like you matched your young daughter. You used the money my mother broke her back, saving pinching pennies just to fund another family. Mom bought you a new dress shirt and you yelled at her for wasting money. Mom was sick in the hospital and you used work as an excuse not to visit. But you have the time to drive to the airport to play out a loving family reunion. Do you think you even deserve to be called a father? My damning accusations smashed Richard's final defenses. He slid off the sofa, dropping to his knees on the cold hardwood floor. He clasped his hands in front of his chest, his voice shattering in panic. I was wrong, Nat. I was so horribly wrong. I know I've sinned against you and your mother, but I gave you life. Have mercy on me. Have mercy on this family. That girl is pitiful. She did nothing wrong. The adults are to blame. I promise. I'll set her up with an apartment somewhere else. I won't let her set foot in this house. Please, I'm begging you, don't tell your mother. She has high blood pressure. She'll have a heart attack if she finds out. I'm begging you, please keep this a secret. His pathetic begging was unbearable. He was using my mother's health as a shield for his own monstrous actions. It was truly laughable. I stood up straight, looking down at the man groveling at my feet. I shook my head, articulating every word clearly and decisively. I will never be an accomplice to this horrific lie. You made your bed, you lie in it. Do not use Mom's health to threaten me. Mom has the right to know the truth. She has the right to make decisions about her own life, not live like a puppet in your stage play. With that, I turned sharply and walked fast toward the stairs. I didn't bother looking back at him even once. I ignored the pitiful, weak pleas echoing in the dark behind me. Returning to my room, I locked the door, buried my face in my pillow, and sobbed uncontrollably. Hot tears soaked the cotton pillowcase. It was an endless night. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rose, the biggest storm of my life would officially sweep through this house. The pale light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting long, sickly streaks across my bedroom floor. Last night was truly a heavy, sleepless night. I had just laid there, staring at the ceiling, counting the dry ticks of the wall clock. My head was pounding, my eyes swollen and stinging from crying too much. By 7:00 a.m., the chirping of sparrows on the porch signaled a new day, but inside I was in dark chaos. The decision had been made after hours of being torn between my love for my mother and my fury toward my deceitful father. I couldn't keep covering for his sins. My mother, the woman who had dedicated her entire life to nurturing this family, had the right to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I painfully pushed myself up. My body ached, like I had just survived a severe illness. I dragged my feet to the bathroom and splashed freezing water on my face to wake myself up. I looked pathetic in the mirror, puffy eyes, pale skin, devoid of life, but deep within those exhausted eyes was an ironclad resolve. I grabbed a brush, pulled my messy hair into a tight bun. I took a deep breath, opened my bedroom door, and stepped out into the hallway. The familiar smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee wafting up from the first floor signaled that my mom was already up. I walked down the stairs with slow, heavy steps. The small kitchen was flooded with bright morning sunlight. My mom was standing with her back to the door, busy scrambling eggs on the stove. The old floral apron tied around her waist accentuated her frail figure. Her hunched back and small shoulders moved with every stir of the spatula. Seeing her tireless silhouette, my stomach cramped. I wanted to run up and hug her to shield her from the hurricane about to make landfall. But I knew I had to be the one to personally tear down this fake velvet curtain of peace. I walked into the kitchen, stopping right behind her. The sizzling of the bacon masked the sound of my footsteps. I softly called out, "Mom." She startled and turned around, spatula still in hand. Seeing my pale face and swollen eyes, the smile on her lips vanished instantly. She hurriedly turned the burner to low and stepped toward me, her voice brimming with worry. "Why are your eyes so swollen? Did you not sleep last night? You look terrible." I looked straight into her eyes. The boundless love reflecting in them made my courage waver for a second. But then the image of the man in the leather jacket holding a young girl at the airport reminded me I had to be strong. I reached out and took her rough hands in mine. My voice was choked with emotion but incredibly firm. "Mom, turn off the stove. We need to talk. It's incredibly important." She looked at me in confusion but obediently reached over and turned off the burner. The kitchen fell silent save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I guided her to the dining table and pressed her down into a chair. I pulled up a chair opposite her and tightly grasped her hands, which were already beginning to tremble. I swallowed hard, gathering all my strength to deliver the razor-sharp words. "Yesterday afternoon at the airport, I wasn't alone. I saw Dad. He wasn't at a board meeting or working late like he said. He died, his hair was wearing a leather jacket, pulling a pink suitcase, and had his arm around a 20-year-old girl. They were acting very much like a couple. Last night I confronted him. He admitted her name is Chloe. She's his illegitimate daughter that he's been hiding from us for 20 years. Her mother just died, so she came here to rely on him." I said everything clearly, sentence by sentence, word by word. I didn't skip a single detail. My mother's hands resting inside mine suddenly turned ice cold. Her complexion went from rosy to a sickly gray, then deathly white. Her lips trembled, parting and closing, but no sound came out. She slowly pulled her hands away, leaning back against her chair. Her eyes stared at me blank and lifeless, like someone who had just had their soul sucked out. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. Her chillingly calm reaction terrified me. She stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth in the narrow kitchen. Her breathing became heavy and rapid. The air in the house solidified, signaling the arrival of a massive storm. She paced the kitchen for a full 10 minutes. The scuffing of her slippers against the linoleum was the only sound in the house. Her face was rigid, her sharp gaze fixed on empty space. Finally, she stopped in front of the refrigerator. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs, and exhaled an icy breath. She walked with steady steps into the living room, heading straight for the side table where the old white landline phone sat. Her frail hand picked up the receiver, and her fingers decisively punched in the familiar number of my father's office. The ringing echoed in the quiet room. I stood by the kitchen door, holding my breath, watching her every move. The moment the other end picked up, my father's booming voice answered, trying to sound incredibly busy. But my mother didn't give him a chance to speak. She gritted her teeth, her voice low and commanding, offering absolutely no room for negotiation. "Take the rest of the day off immediately. Be home in exactly 30 minutes. I will not accept a single excuse or delay. Get home, now." With that, she slammed the receiver down onto the cradle with a violent crack. The force was so strong the phone bounced off the table. She turned and sat upright on the sofa, her hands crossed in her lap, her eyes glued to the closed front door. I walked into the living room and quietly sat in the chair across from her. I didn't dare speak to comfort her, nor did I dare cry. The atmosphere was so thick it was hard to breathe. We sat in silence like two stone statues, counting every passing second. The clock ticked relentlessly, every beat feeling like a fire alarm drilling into our minds, stretching the agonizing wait. Exactly 28 minutes later, the rumble of my father's sedan pulling into the driveway broke the silence. The sound of keys fumbling frantically at the front door echoed. The heavy oak door pushed open. My father appeared. He was in his usual neat corporate attire, his briefcase tucked under his arm. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his pale face clearly showing his panic and unease. The moment he stepped into the living room, his eyes met the sight of my mother and me sitting parallel to each other, staring at him as coldly as executioners. His briefcase slipped from his hand, thudding onto the floor. He swallowed hard, trying to force out a pathetic, twisted smile. "What happened? Why did you call me home so urgently? I was right in the middle of the morning stand-up." My mother didn't answer immediately. She slowly stood up, her stern eyes scanning the man she had shared a bed with for 30 years from head to toe. Her voice hissed through her teeth, bone-chillingly cold. "Did your morning stand-up include a girl named Chloe, wearing a white sundress? Or is your illegitimate daughter waiting for you at the Starbucks down the street?" Her words detonated like a bomb in the living room. My dad stumbled backward, almost falling over. His face warped entirely with terror. The hypocritical mask was ripped off entirely, leaving nothing to hide behind. He shot me a glare of pure resentment, silently accusing me of breaking my promise, but I only replied with a look of absolute disgust. He started stammering, rubbing his hands together, nervously, stepping forward as if to grab my mom's hands, but she violently slapped him away. "Susan, let me explain. It's not what you think. I only made one mistake during a business trip. She was a complete accident." The broken confession of a guilty man rang out clearly. The existence of the illegitimate child was officially confirmed from his own mouth. The dark shadow of deceit completely swallowed the house, ready to burn everything to ash. My father dropped his head, his knees hitting the hardwood floor. The man who was always so arrogant, so proud of his success and moral high ground, morphed into a cowardly wretch, trembling for pity. He started rambling, repeating the exact same story about the Midwestern construction project 20 years ago, the temptation of alcohol and the tragic circumstances of the now motherless girl. He swore up and down, promising to cut all ties, to give her a lump sum to start her life, and swore she would never step foot in this house. Tears streamed down his wrinkled face. My mom stood silently listening to his entire pathetic defense. Her expression didn't change. There was no extreme shock, no devastated heartbreak of a wife just discovering her husband's infidelity. She simply stood there cold and majestic as a glacier. When Richard finished his final desperate promise, my mother suddenly laughed. A bitter, agonizing laugh that echoed off the four walls of the living room, making both my dad and me flinch in terror. She stopped laughing and marched over to the wooden credenza in the corner of the room. She pulled open the bottom drawer and yanked out a metal lockbox usually used for important documents. She walked straight back to my dad and slammed the box down onto the coffee table right in front of him. The lid popped open, spilling out dozens of printed papers covered in text and numbers. "You don't need to put on a show anymore. Do you think I'm some blind, naive woman who trusts you unconditionally? The truth about your unacknowledged child, I found out about it 3 years ago." Her declaration struck me like lightning. My father looked up at her with bloodshot eyes, sheer horror etched onto his face. 3 years ago, Mom knew everything. 3 years ago, my heart twisted in agony. For 1,000 days, my small, fragile mother had carried this horrific secret alone without showing a single sign of breaking down. She pointed at the papers on the table, her voice ringing out like steel. 3 years ago, I was cleaning out your home office and accidentally knocked over your old leather briefcase. These bank statements fell out. For 17 years, you consistently wired a massive amount of money to an unknown woman in another state every single month. It was half your paycheck. I paid a private investigator out of my own pocket, and they brought back photos of you holding a toddler in a park in that city during one of your business trips. You said you only sent money and never saw her. Stop lying. You raised her, you visited them perfectly under the guise of your extended business trips. My father was utterly speechless. He hung his head, unable to look his wife in the eye. I rushed over and grabbed my mother's arm, tears soaking her sleeve. I cried out in pain. "Why, if you knew, why did you bear it alone? Why didn't you blow everything up and throw this lying man out? Why did you repress yourself like that?" She reached out and stroked my hair. Her eyes looked at me, overflowing with boundless sacrifice and sorrow. She explained in a choked voice, every word carving into my soul. "Because of you, Nat. 3 years ago was when you just graduated, got a good job, and were bringing your serious boyfriend home to meet us. His family is conservative, wealthy, and very big on family values. I was terrified. I was so terrified that if the scandal of your father's illegitimate child broke out and our family shattered, you'd carry the stigma of coming from a broken home. I was afraid your future in-laws would look down on you, that it would ruin your chance at happiness. I'd rather swallow the bitter pill, endure the pain of betrayal every night, just to maintain the image of a perfect father and a flawless family for your engagement. A mother's sacred love and immense sacrifice broke my heart into pieces. I threw my arms around her, sobbing loudly. She had traded her youth, her own peace of mind, just for me. Meanwhile, the man kneeling on the floor had ruthlessly trampled all over her endurance. My crying echoed through the living room, blending with the heavy sighs of the man groveling on the floor. The air seemed to boil with the rage and repressed resentment my mother had held back for years. The final straw had broken the camel's back. Her patience and noble sacrifices were repaid with ultimate despair. She gently pushed me away, stood up straight, and pointed a trembling finger directly at Richard's face. With the most piercing, harsh tone, she began her brutal awakening of the man who had shattered her trust. Richard, in the 30 years I've been in this house, I have never lived a single day for myself. For 30 years, I took care of your bedridden parents. I woke up at dawn and stayed up late, making sure your entire extended family was fed and comfortable. During the freezing winters, I didn't dare turn up the thermostat because I was worried about the heating bill. I washed your parents' soiled sheets by hand. Did you ever feel sorry for me? Even once. She stepped forward, her resolute eyes filled with resentment. I clipped coupons. I didn't dare buy a single tube of lipstick or a new winter coat just so we could save money for you to buy a luxury sedan. Just so you could keep up your image as a corporate director in front of your colleagues. At dinner, I gave you and Natalie the best cuts of meat and ate the leftovers myself. And yet the money I scraped together with my blood and sweat you brazenly wired to another woman. My dad rubbed his forehead, continuously muttering apologies, but nothing could stop the waterfall of fury pouring from my mother. Do you remember New Year's Eve 10 years ago? You claimed the office had a crisis and you had to stay to manage it. Natalie and I sat by the fireplace eating a cold dinner, watching the neighborhood fireworks, crying because we felt so bad you had to work. But the truth is, you were out of state with her. Do you remember all the times you said you had to visit a sick relative? It was all cheap lies so you could sneak off to see your other daughter. Tears poured down my mother's face like rain, soaking her worn cheeks. Her sobs broke through her exhaustion. For 3 years since the day I found out, I lied to myself. I told myself you were just fulfilling an obligation. You still came home, you still paid the bills, you still took care of us. I patiently waited for you to change your ways, to end that story, and come back to being a real husband and father. But I was wrong. Your true nature is selfishness. Yesterday, when Nat told me how you dressed up smiling and looking so happy next to your biological daughter at the airport, I realized the truth. This house is just a hotel you pass through. Your real joy is somewhere else entirely. Her endurance had hit its absolute limit. Her speech wasn't a loud, screaming argument. It was a hammer striking his conscience, exposing the entirety of his lies. It was the nail in the coffin of a 30-year marriage built on one-sided sacrifice and deceit. Having released all her ultimate frustrations, my mom seemed completely drained. She stumbled back a few steps and collapsed onto the armchair. Her eyes stared blankly into space, devoid of tears, devoid of heartbreaking complaints. Her heart had likely been damaged beyond repair, the trauma branded into every tired breath. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Her cold, decisive voice broke the suffocating silence. Natalie, go upstairs and pack a few bags for me and pack some for yourself too. We are going to Nana's house for a while. Her firm command shocked my father out of his kneeling stupor. He jumped up, rushing over and gripping the armrests of her chair. His face was twisted in pathetic terror. The fact that his enduring wife of 30 years was actually deciding to leave this house was something he couldn't even fathom. Susan, please, yell at me, curse me out however you want, just please don't leave. If you leave, this won't be a home anymore. For my sake, for Nat's sake, please give me a chance to make it right. My mom coldly turned her head to avoid his desperate gaze. She didn't look at him even once as her emotionless voice rang out. Get away from me. I need space to breathe. If I have to look at your face in this house for one more minute, I'm afraid I'll lose my mind. I gave him a hard glare and quickly ran upstairs. I threw open the closet doors, shoving some of Mom's comfortable clothes, toiletries, and a few of my own outfits into a duffel bag. I packed the essentials in under 5 minutes and dragged the bag downstairs. Every footstep on the wooden stairs sounded like the beat of a separation drum. When I got to the living room, Mom was already at the front door. She had put on a light jacket. My dad was still standing frozen in the middle of the room, hanging his head and letting out pathetic sighs. But his belated regret couldn't shake my mother's resolve. I grabbed the bags and followed her out, pulling the heavy front door open. The glaring midday sun hit our faces. The suburban street was quiet, devoid of people. The distant sound of lawnmowers only added to the emptiness. I pulled the door shut, locking the deceit, the betrayal, and that man inside. I ordered an Uber, and when it arrived, I helped my mom into the back seat. The car rolled away, leaving the familiar three-story colonial house shrinking in the distance. Sitting in the car, Mom rested her head against the window, her eyes half closed in exhaustion. She gripped my hand tightly. Her fingers were icy and trembling. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze to transfer some warmth. The journey back to Nana's house today didn't carry the joy of a family reunion like it usually did. It carried sheer exhaustion, a retreat from a home that had been obliterated by a hurricane of lies. I looked out the window. The city streets were bustling the world, continuing its routine. Only my family was officially broken, needing an endless silence to find peace. Nana's rustic farmhouse sat quietly nestled in a rural county in upstate New York. The property was surrounded by towering oak trees and a sprawling front porch with rocking chairs. The air here had a rare, tranquil sweetness, entirely isolated from the noise and deceit of the city we had just fled. But the peaceful scenery couldn't soothe the pain clawing at my mother's heart. From the moment she stepped out of the car, Mom walked silently to the small guest room in the back of the house, lay down on the old quilt, and faced the wall. For 3 consecutive days, she barely ate. The bowls of chicken noodle soup I painstakingly made and brought to her were all met with a weak wave of her hand. Her face grew visibly gaunt, her eyes hollow, her skin pale and ashen like a dried-out leaf. She didn't shed another tear. A terrifying silence enveloped her frail figure. Occasionally, I could hear heavy sighs escaping her thin chest as if she were trying to push out boulders stuck in her throat. I called into work and took a full week of PTO to stay by her side day and night. Just seeing her suffer like this made the fury toward my dad and his illegitimate daughter Chloe flare up violently. I wanted to banish them from our lives forever. On the evening of the 3rd day, as I was sitting on the porch snapping green beans for dinner, the phone on the patio table vibrated briefly. The notification ping sounded harsh in the quiet country night. I frowned, wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead, and picked up the phone. The screen showed a text message from a completely unknown number. I unlocked the screen and the short text hit my eyes, leaving me stunned. "Hi Natalie, this is Chloe. Can I meet with you for a little bit?" Reading that message, the fire of annoyance ignited instantly. Who gave her the right to text me and use my first name so casually? Her very existence was the source of my family's destruction, and the reason my mother had been suffering in bed for 3 days. I gritted my teeth, my thumb hovering over the block button. But then my reason hit the brakes. Avoiding this wouldn't solve the core issue. My dad was definitely still sneaking around, trying to set things up for her. If I didn't settle this debt clearly and definitively, my family would be stuck in this vicious cycle forever. I needed to meet her face to face. Look, the person who intruded on my family in the eye demands she disappear from our sight and return peace to my mother. I typed quickly on my keyboard, sending back an incredibly cold and decisive reply. Fine. Tomorrow at 3:00 p.m. at Oak and Ember Coffee, corner of Main and 4th. I have exactly 30 minutes to speak with you. Less than 5 seconds later, the screen lit up with a response. Yes, thank you so much. I will be there on time. I tossed the phone onto the table and let out an irritated sigh. The hazy moonlight shone down on the wooden porch. Tomorrow, on behalf of my mother, I would clean up this mess. I told myself I had to be strong, that I wouldn't let myself be softened by whatever excuses she had. At exactly 3:00 p.m. the next day, I pushed open the glass door to Oak and Ember Coffee. The shop had a vintage rustic vibe. Soft acoustic music and the smell of roasted coffee beans created a strangely melancholic atmosphere. I scanned the room. At a secluded corner table near the window, a petite girl was sitting with her head bowed. In stark contrast to the bright, flowy white sundress from the airport today, she was dressed in pitch black from head to toe. A modest black cardigan, her long hair pulled back into a neat ponytail at the nape of her neck, revealing a pale face and swollen, bloodshot eyes. It was Chloe. Hearing my footsteps approach, Chloe quickly stood up. Her thin hands gripped the edge of the wooden table. She hunched her shoulders slightly, speaking in a timid, terrified voice. "Hi, Natalie. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to see me." I didn't reply. I coldly pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. I crossed my arms, staring sternly at her young face. The silence was so heavy I could clearly hear her anxious, rapid breathing. She slowly sat back down, clasping her hands tightly in her lap, her fingers digging into each other. I don't have a lot of time. What is your purpose for calling me here? Did you want to talk about money, or are you trying to publicly claim your title as the biological daughter to get a cut of his assets? I opened with the most blunt, hostile words I could muster. My words hit a nerve and Chloe's tears immediately spilled over. She shook her head frantically, tears dropping onto the wooden table. Her voice broke, choked with sobs. I don't dare ask for anything. I only asked you here to apologize. To apologize 1,000,000 times to you and your mother. I had no idea my existence would break your family. Dad didn't tell me the truth. He told me his family up here was small, that you and your mom were happy and willing to take me in so I could finish college. I frowned, sensing something was wrong. My dad had woven a web of lies not just for me and my mom, but for this girl as well. I lowered my voice, demanding she explain everything clearly. Chloe wiped her tears, sniffing as she recounted the truth about her life. She grew up in a small, rural Midwestern town branded as the fatherless kid. Her childhood consisted of being teased by classmates and judged by neighbors. Her mother, out of shame, lived a closed-off life, working day and night to raise her. Every month, her mom received a wire transfer, but there was absolutely no care or contact from the man she called her father. Chloe desperately craved a father's love, but her mother adamantly kept Richard's identity a secret. Last month, my mom found out she had terminal cancer. It progressed so fast. Right before she passed away, she finally gave me the paper with Dad's address and phone number. She said she felt guilty toward his wife up here, but she couldn't die knowing I'd be completely alone in the world. She told me to call him and beg him to help me get through my senior year of college. Chloe burst into uncontrollable sobs, her shoulders shaking violently from the still raw pain of losing her mother. My chest suddenly felt heavy. The initial fury I had carried in slowly dissipated, replaced by a creeping sense of pity. I looked at the girl in black across from me. She wasn't a scheming homewrecker trying to steal my family. She was actually just a pitiful victim molded by the deceit and selfishness of adults. The absence of a father, the agony of losing her mother and being entirely alone in a strange city had pushed her to a dead end. I took a deep breath, poured a glass of water from the carafe on the table and slid it toward her. My tone lost its harshness, replaced by a serious sense of empathy. You don't need to apologize. The blame falls entirely on the lies of the adults. You're just someone who got collateral damage from his selfishness. Drink this water and stop crying. Chloe looked up at me, her tear-streaked face reflecting absolute shock mixed with profound gratitude. That afternoon in the quiet coffee shop, the resentment between two women sharing the same blood began to ease through understanding and forgiveness. It was dark by the time I returned to Nana's farmhouse. Crickets chirped loudly in the dew-soaked grass. I tiptoed into the small guest room. Mom had finally sat up. She was leaning against the wall, holding a bowl of lukewarm chicken broth, painfully forcing down small sips. The pale light from the bedside lamp illuminated her gaunt face, making my heart ache boundlessly. I walked over, took the bowl from her hands, and set it on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed and took her cold, frail hands in mine. It was time to tell her the whole truth about the meeting. I didn't want to hide anything from her anymore. Mom, I went to see that girl Chloe this afternoon, I began, in a gentle, clear voice. Mom's hands flinched and pulled back slightly, but then rested still in mine. She didn't look at me, her eyes still fixed on the empty space, but I knew she was focusing entirely on listening. I detailed the black morning clothes Chloe wore. I described her swollen eyes from crying over her recently deceased mother. I repeated the heartbreaking confessions of a kid who grew up without a father, alienated by her town, and how desperately she wanted a tiny semblance of a family. I explained Dad's lies, how he had deceived both families to maintain his illusion of peace. I spoke slowly and clearly. The room was perfectly quiet, save for my own heavy sighs. When I finished telling her about Chloe's circumstances, I felt hot tears dropping onto the back of my hands. She slowly turned to look at me. Her worn eyes were brimming with tears. The deep-seated bitterness and depression from the past 3 days seemed to have faded significantly. In their place, deep within those eyes, the instinct of a mother was rising stronger than ever. She was a mother. She understood the absolute agony of a child left orphaned and abandoned in the world. She reached up and wiped the tears from her cheeks. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but holding an incredibly steadfast resolve. You're right, Nat. The adults caused this. We shouldn't let a pitiful girl like Chloe suffer any more than she has. She lost her mother. There is no greater sadness in this world than losing your mother. She is completely innocent in your father's sins. She paused, looking out the dark window. The wind rustling through the oak trees seemed to harmonize with a soul seeking peace. A massive decision was forming in the heart of the woman who had spent her life enduring. Your father is a terrible, selfish man. I resent him for taking my youth and my trust. But if I push him into a corner and force him to abandon a girl who has nothing left, then I become a heartless person driving a life to a dead end. I can't be that cruel, Nat. She turned to look me in the eye, squeezing my hands. A strange warmth radiated from her calloused palms. I am going to forgive your father. Not because I'm still clinging to him, but because I want peace in my heart. I want Chloe to have a family, a safe place to live, and finish her education. I am going to open my arms and take her in. I threw my arms around my mother. Tears of overwhelming emotion burst onto her faded cardigan, the magnificence of a mother's love. Her boundless forgiveness had overshadowed all petty grievances. My mother didn't choose to discard them to satisfy her own bitterness. She chose grace to heal the wounds and lift up a tragic life. That night in the small room, smelling of fresh linen and old wood, the storm officially receded, making way for a peaceful sky dawning on the horizon. The next morning, the sky was unusually blue and clear. Brilliant golden sunlight pierced through the oak leaves, casting shimmering rays across the front porch. Per my mother's decision, I called my dad and demanded he bring Chloe to the farmhouse to meet us. The phone call was incredibly brief, but enough to leave the man on the other end fumbling in fear of an impending argument. At exactly 10:00 a.m., an Uber pulled up to the driveway. My dad stepped out looking exhausted and having aged a decade. His dyed black hair now showed stark white roots. He hunched over, walked around to the other side, and opened the door for Chloe. The petite girl was still wearing her black clothes. She kept her head down, hands clasped anxiously, taking timid, slow steps behind my dad. They looked like sinners walking up to beg for a pardon. My mom was already sitting in a rocking chair on the front porch. She was wearing a nice maroon sweater, her hair neatly brushed and pinned up. Her expression was calm and authoritative. I stood right behind her, watching every move the two of them made as they walked up the driveway. My dad stopped about 6 feet from the porch. He didn't dare look my mom in the eye. He shifted on his feet. Chloe stood hiding behind him, her small shoulders trembling with anxiety. Mom slowly stood up. She motioned for my dad to step aside. With steady steps, she walked down the porch stairs, heading straight for the trembling girl. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, biting her bottom lip as if bracing herself for harsh reprimands. But no complaints came. Instead, a warm pair of arms, smelling of laundry detergent and vanilla, reached out and completely enveloped Chloe's small frame. Mom hugged her husband's illegitimate daughter, gently patting her thin back. Her voice rang out soft and warm like an autumn stream, melting all the ice in the orphaned girl's heart. You silly girl, why are you so terrified? This is the adult's mess. You are not to blame at all. Don't cry anymore. Think of me as your family. Think of our house as your home. I will make sure you finish school. My mother's words acted like magic, shattering every barrier. Chloe's eyes flew open in absolute disbelief. The warmth from this worn-out woman was so genuine and forgiving that it erased all of the girl's hesitation. Chloe burst into loud sobs. She threw her arms around my mom's waist, buried her face in her chest, and choked out the words she had been longing to say for so long. Mom. Thank you, Mom. Standing a few feet away, my dad witnessed the entire scene. The proud shell of the successful corporate man completely shattered in the face of his wife's incredible grace and forgiveness. He dropped to his knees on the gravel driveway, burying his face in his hands and weeping. Under the bright sun, the cries of pure remorse echoed. He clutched his head, repeating belated promises. I'm a terrible man. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Susan. For the rest of my life, I swear I'll do everything to make it right, to make up for the pain I caused you and Nat. My mom didn't say another word to him. She just stroked Chloe's hair and gently led the young girl up onto the porch. The greatest hurricane in my family had passed. This house was now welcoming a new member, not out of obligation, but through the boundless love and forgiveness of a mother. Time flew by, and before we knew it, it was New Year's Eve. The festive spirit was buzzing, weaving through every street in the suburbs. After that meeting at the farmhouse, our family of 4 officially reunited under one roof. The atmosphere in the house had changed miraculously. The dark shadows of deceit and heavy sighs were completely gone, replaced by chatter, laughter, and genuine understanding. My dad made good on his oath. As soon as we got back to the city, he filed for early retirement, giving up the director's chair he had spent his life fighting for. He handed his entire 401k savings and pension over to my mom to manage. The once imposing corporate man now wore his wife's familiar floral apron, bustling around the kitchen from morning till night. He grocery shopped, cooked, cleaned, and carefully massaged my mom's legs whenever her arthritis flared up in the cold. Mom no longer had to wake up early or stay up late doing chores. She had time to join a local book club and go to yoga with her friends in the neighborhood. Her pale skin regained its healthy glow, and a gentle smile permanently replaced her worried frown. As for Chloe, she truly brought more joy to the family. Wrapped in my mom's love and protection, she became vibrant and outgoing. She was incredibly sweet, always helping with chores, and grew particularly attached to me. She called me Big Sister, with an endearing Midwestern twang. The two of us frequently went shopping together, sharing girl talk. We were as close as sisters who had grown up together. On the afternoon of New Year's Eve, the house was filled with the cozy smell of burning firewood and the mouth-watering aroma of a prime rib roasting in the oven. In the kitchen, my dad was meticulously slicing up potatoes for a gratin. Chloe stood next to him, eagerly chopping up fresh herbs for the garnish. I was helping Mom set the dining table with our best china. Looking through the kitchen doorway, I saw Dad patiently teaching Chloe how to make the perfect au jus gravy for the roast. Father and daughter were laughing happily. It was a simple, beautiful scene they had missed out on for 20 years. That evening, the New Year's Eve feast was laid out in the dining room, a lavish spread of hot traditional holiday dishes. The four of us gathered around the table. My dad personally poured 4 glasses of champagne, solemnly raising his glass. His teary eyes scanned the room, lingering for a long time on my mother's gentle face. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, my 2 daughters. This family is everything to me. Happy New Year. Here's to peace and happiness. 4 crystal flutes clinked together, ringing out a joyful chime. My mom smiled the brightest, most serene smile I had ever seen. Chloe scooped a big spoonful of mashed potatoes onto Mom's plate, then turned and handed me a warm dinner roll. Love was overflowing, bridging every gap the past had left behind. Outside the window, vibrant fireworks began to explode in the night sky, illuminating the vast expanse as the neighborhood celebrated the countdown. The deceitful past, the tears and the storms were officially closed behind us. My family was now stepping into a new chapter, overflowing with forgiveness, grace, and a truly fulfilling, peaceful warmth. I took a sip of the sweet champagne, letting the taste linger on my tongue, knowing that my mother's embrace had saved this entire family from a lifetime of sorrow.